My sister shoved me down the stairs. Now my parents want me to stay silent. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I ended up in the hospital after my sister shoved me down the stairs during her party, claiming it was just a harmless joke. Now my parents are threatening to take away my inheritance if I press charges. I'm 28 years old and 4 months pregnant. For the past 2 years, my husband, Newton, and I have been trying desperately to conceive. There were moments when we thought it would never happen, that maybe we weren't meant to be parents. The wait was agonizing, filled with hope and heartbreak. And then, just when we least expected it, I found out I was pregnant. After everything we had been through, this pregnancy meant the world to us. We were finally going to be parents, and the joy we felt was indescribable. But because I had suffered miscarriages in the past, we decided to keep the news a secret until we were absolutely certain everything was progressing safely. If something were to go wrong again, we wanted to grieve in private, without the added burden of explaining our pain to everyone around us. My younger sister, Elle, and my parents had no idea about my pregnancy until last week. It felt strange to keep such big news from them, especially since my family is the type that celebrates everything, big and small. I love that about them. We've shared so many beautiful memories together. But for the past 4 months, I had distanced myself from family gatherings, simply because this pregnancy was taking such an emotional toll on me. I needed space to process it all. Last week, Elle received a promotion at work, something she had worked tirelessly for. She was ecstatic, and I understood why. Just last year, she had been devastated in the most humiliating way possible. She had spent months planning her dream wedding, only for her fiancé to betray her the night before. He had cheated on her at his own bachelor party, then didn't even have the decency to tell her himself. Instead, one of his friends delivered the news on the morning of the wedding. He wasn't coming. The heartbreak was unbearable. Elle had been shattered, humiliated in front of all her friends and family. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and instead, it became the most painful. After that disaster, she threw herself into work. She used it as a way to cope, to bury her pain in something productive. And in the end, her efforts paid off. She was promoted. This promotion wasn't just a career milestone for her. It was proof that she had taken back control of her life, that she had risen above the pain. She begged me to come to her celebration, telling me how much she missed me. My parents also pressured me, saying it would mean the world to her if I showed up. They reminded me that I had skipped the last few gatherings and that this was important. I didn't want to let her down. I knew how much this meant to her, and I wanted to be there. The only problem was my growing baby bump. I didn't want to steal her spotlight, didn't want anyone's attention shifting from her to my pregnancy. So, I did everything I could to hide it. I wore a flowing dress, even put on shapewear to minimize the bump. For one night, I could manage. When I arrived at the party, everything seemed fine. No one noticed my pregnancy, and I started to relax, happy to celebrate with my sister. But then, my mother made an observation that changed everything. She noticed my arms and cheeks looked fuller. I had prepared for moments like this. When my mother commented on my fuller arms and rounder cheeks, I quickly laughed it off, joking that I had just been eating too much lately. The last thing I needed was for anyone to figure out the truth about my pregnancy. Not yet. For now, it was safer this way. As the night dragged on, exhaustion crept over me. The music, the laughter, the endless dancing, it all became too much. I wasn't used to staying up late anymore, and the heat mixed with the greasy food made me nauseous. I slipped inside the house, searching for a quiet place to sit. The couch in the dimly lit living room seemed like the perfect escape. I sank into it, closed my eyes for just a moment, and the next thing I knew, Aunt Mia was sitting beside me, waking me up. She offered me a glass of wine, and I shook my head without explanation. Her gaze lingered on me, her sharp eyes scanning my face. Then, with a knowing smile, she said it. "You look pregnant." My breath caught in my throat. I forced a casual shrug, avoiding eye contact. "What?" "No, I've just been eating a lot lately." Aunt Mia wasn't fooled. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you really?" Panic swelled inside me. I tried again to brush it off, but before I could react, she placed a hand gently on my stomach. And that was all it took. Her eyes widened, her entire face lighting up with realization. "Oh my God, darling, you are pregnant." Before I could stop her, before I could explain, beg, or even breathe, Aunt Mia had jumped up and rushed outside. My stomach twisted into knots as I scrambled to my feet, following her as fast as I could. I saw it happen in slow motion, her raising her glass, calling for attention, and then, with all the enthusiasm in the world, announcing my pregnancy to the entire party. Silence fell for a split second as the words sank in. Then chaos. People swarmed me, shouting congratulations, hugging me, crying, laughing. My parents were sobbing, their joy unmistakable. Newton was pulled into the crowd, clapped on the back by a dozen hands. It was everything I had wanted to avoid. And then I saw her. Elle stood off to the side, her smile tight, her posture stiff. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't hugging me. She was barely looking at me at all. Guilt punched me in the stomach. This was her night, her moment of triumph, and now it had been overshadowed. I broke free from the crowd and walked over to her, my heart pounding. "I'm so sorry," I said softly. "I didn't plan for Aunt Mia to." Elle let out a slow breath, her lips pressing together. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I hesitated. I wanted to wait. To be sure everything was okay. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Then she murmured, "Whatever. I guess you got what you wanted." The words stung. I tried to explain, but she took a long sip of her wine and turned away, leaving me standing there with a hollow ache in my chest. For the rest of the night, everyone else was overjoyed, offering endless advice about parenthood. But every time I glanced at Elle, she was watching me with that same expression, like I had stolen something from her. I needed a break. At one point, I slipped upstairs to use the bathroom, my bladder protesting after hours of standing in small talk. But when I stepped out, Elle was there waiting for me. Her eyes were glassy and I could smell the alcohol on her breath. I tried to smile to break the tension. "Hey, look, Are you really pregnant?" she interrupted. Her voice was low, almost accusatory. My hand instinctively went to my stomach. "Of course I am," I said, my brows furrowing. "Why would I lie about that?" Elle scoffed, shaking her head. "It's just weird," she muttered. "You never even told Mom. You tell her everything." Frustration bubbled up inside me. I already explained, I needed time. I wasn't ready. Then she said it. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it was something darker. But with a cruel smirk, she looked me right in the eye and said, "Maybe this pregnancy will end in a miscarriage too. Just like the others." The air was sucked from my lungs. My entire body went cold. I stared at her, disbelief crashing over me in waves. "How?" My voice shook. "How dare you say that?" Elle just shrugged, taking another sip of her wine. "You took the attention from me. Just like always." I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The pain, the rage, the sheer shock of her words clawed at my throat. My hands curled into fists at my sides. "I've apologized to you over and over tonight," I snapped. "But this is beyond cruel." She just rolled her eyes, her expression unreadable. And then she took a step forward. And another. Before I could react, before I could understand what was happening, she shoved me. The world tilted. My feet slipped. And then, I was falling. My mother's face twisted with pain, but I didn't waver. I had spent too many nights feeling betrayed, too many moments wondering if I had ever truly meant as much to my parents as Elle did. And now, after everything, after the trial, the restraining order, and months of silence, she expected to just walk back into my life like nothing had happened? "I don't think this is a good idea," I said firmly, my hands instinctively cradling my baby. Newton, standing protectively beside me, crossed his arms. "You made your choice, Mom. You sided with Elle. You threatened to disown me. And now, you think you can just show up and act like none of it happened." Her eyes glistened with tears and she shook her head. "Sweetheart, I was wrong," she whispered. "I know I was wrong. I was trying to protect my family. I didn't want Elle's life to be ruined. But mine was fair game?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I had intended. "You watched me suffer, you watched me nearly lose my child, and you told me to let it go. You told me that family was family, until it was me who needed protecting." My mother took a step forward, reaching out as if to touch me, but Newton shifted, blocking her path. She flinched, as though realizing for the first time that she was no longer welcome. "Please," she murmured. "Let me see my grandchild." I hesitated. A part of me, the daughter who had once believed my mother would always be in my corner, wanted to let her in. But the woman standing in front of me wasn't that mother anymore. She had proven where her loyalties lay. Before I could speak, Newton exhaled sharply and said, "No." The finality in his tone made my mother's breath hitch. "Newton, please," she pleaded. I watched my wife nearly die, and you defended the person who did it," he said coldly. You had months to reach out. Months to make things right. And now you want to walk in like you've done nothing wrong? No. That's not how this works. My mother's shoulders sagged, her lips quivering as she looked at me with a silent plea. I had to force myself to hold firm. I need time, I said at last, my voice softer now. Maybe one day. But not now. Not like this. Tears spilled down her cheeks and she gave a small, defeated nod. I understand, she whispered. Before she could say another word, a car pulled up at the curb. My father stepped out, a gift bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. When he saw the way my mother stood frozen in the doorway, his brows furrowed. What's going on? He asked, approaching us. Newton squared his shoulders. You should leave, he said simply. My father's expression darkened. Now listen. No, I interrupted, my voice steady. You don't get to show up and pretend like everything is fine. You both chose Elle. And maybe that's something you'll have to live with, but I have to think about my child now. I glanced down at my baby, peacefully sleeping in my arms. I won't let you walk in and out of his life on your terms. Silence stretched between us. My mother clutched my father's arm, her body trembling. We'll go, she murmured. But please don't shut us out forever. I didn't answer. Newton reached for the door, stepping inside before pulling it closed behind us. I heard my mother sob as we locked the door. My father muttered something under his breath, and then, finally, their footsteps faded away. Newton turned to me, watching me carefully. Are you okay? I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. I think so. I glanced down at my baby, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. I had made the right choice. My child would be safe. My family, my real family, the one Newton and I were building, was all that mattered now. No more second chances. No more betrayal. Elle was in the past, and I was finally free. She had given up her right to be a grandmother. Newton reminded her that Elle had treated me cruelly and that if she hadn't been my sister, he wouldn't have hesitated to make her pay for what she did. But instead of holding Elle accountable, my mother had chosen to shield the monster, excusing her actions because she was family. I could tell his words struck a nerve. The sharp change in my mother's expression told me everything. Her anger flared. She tried to counter, insisting that what happened was in the past, that she had done what she thought was best. She argued that we couldn't just erase her and my father from our lives, especially now that we had a child. It was unfair, she claimed, to deprive them of knowing their grandchild. Newton wasn't having any of it. This is our son. Our choice. And we don't feel safe with you in our lives, he said, his voice firm and unyielding. She tried again, this time playing the sympathy card. Elle was struggling, she said. She had been diagnosed with depression. She felt guilty for what she had done and was trying to change. My mother was convinced that now, with my son here, we could finally move on and be a family again. I let out a bitter laugh. You really think we can just forget everything? That I can forget being shoved down the stairs, fearing for my unborn child? That I can forget how you chose to stand by Elle instead of me? Things will never go back to the way they were. I told her to leave. I was done with this conversation, done with the manipulation, done with her attempts to twist everything in Elle's favor. Then my father pulled into the driveway. He stepped out of the car, holding a basket of baby gifts and a massive teddy bear, as if that would somehow erase the past. I was too drained to argue anymore. The sheer audacity of them showing up uninvited after months of silence was beyond belief. Newton stepped forward, his stance protective. Go inside, he told me quietly. I'll handle this. I didn't argue. As I walked back inside, I could still hear their voices through the door. My father, demanding to see his grandchild as if he had some right. Newton, normally calm and composed, finally losing his patience. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. My father refused to back down. He insisted on leaving the gifts as though they could serve as an apology. Newton refused. We don't need anything from you, he said coldly. And if you ever show up here again, I'll make sure there's a restraining order in place to keep you away. His words hit harder than they expected. I think, for the first time, my parents realized the damage they had done. That they couldn't just waltz back into our lives now that there was a baby involved. That their choices had consequences. Newton and I made a decision that night. We installed security cameras around the house. If they ever tried to force their way back in, we would be ready. And as I sat in the quiet of my home, holding my newborn son in my arms, I knew one thing for certain. My family was the one I had built with Newton, not the one I had left behind. But I have to ask, do you think people like my parents ever truly realize the damage they've done? Or do they only regret losing access to what they want? This story teaches us a powerful lesson about self-respect, boundaries, and the true meaning of family. Blood doesn't give someone the right to mistreat you, and forgiveness should never come at the cost of your well-being. Sometimes, walking away from toxic relationships is the only way to protect yourself and those you love. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to cut ties for your own peace? Let's discuss. And if you found this story gripping, please like, share, and subscribe to show your love and support. Your engagement keeps us going.